intros about Caroline and I, so you can get to know us briefly before we shift to our main focus of today, which will be Trina. So welcome to this leadership lab around vision, commitment, and action. We're calling ourselves the Lab Techs for today, running with this laboratory theme. And for those of you who haven't been to the Leadership Lab before, this is our third session of this. And the whole goal is really to focus on leaders around Oracle and to understand a little bit more about who they are, what they believe in, and how we can learn from their leadership styles and their insights and apply that to our work. So Caroline, I'm going to let you introduce yourself as a fellow lab tech and tell us a little bit about the quote that is underneath your name.
Hi, I'm Caroline. I'm a copywriter on the Experience Agency, and yeah, I thought one of the things that really struck me in preparing for this session with Trina is really how when you become a leader, it's a mindset shift. And you go from like worrying about your own individual performance and what your best work looks like, and you kind of redefine it by your best work is enabling others to do their best work and creating an environment where everyone performs their best. And that was a new insight for me.
Cool. Thanks. And hey everybody, I'm Ben Kimberly. I'm an innovation strategist. And in addition to working on project level work to focus on the client experience, I get to do fun stuff like this and work with the Cloud Institute and put on a leadership lab to focus in on some of the development of the folks that we have internally as well. My quote comes from Peter Drucker, who is a management guru. It says, "Problems go away because someone does something about them." And you'll hear later, Trina's going to talk about the action component of her kind of philosophy or her approach. And I think that a lot of times we think someone else is going to handle things. We point to someone else to do things, but the only way things are going to get solved, the only way problems are going to be addressed is if someone actually does something about them. So that's just a fun quote from my end. A couple housekeeping elements before we jump in. Is that we want you to jump in. This is an intentionally small session, and we want people to be using the chat, come up, mute, and ask questions. You know, we've worked with Trina to pull out some of her keys, and she'll share those, but we want you to be also engaged in this. If you have questions, we're going to ask you at points too, to think about projects that you're working on and what are ways you can attach these lessons that we're talking about today to your projects. So we want to hear from you. Don't worry, you'll get the deck. We'll share the deck, and Caroline's also working on a little workbook with some of the questions and a way that you can take the lessons from today and apply it to your projects. And also, we're recording, so just want to be transparent about that, but also don't feel like you need to write down everything Trina's saying. We'll have a recording that we'll send out to you all so you can hear all these things from that later on. So with that, enough from us, because we're not here just to have Caroline and Ben talk. Trina, I'm going to hand it over to you to do some intros to people who don't know you and talk a little bit about some of the accolades that we see here on the slide.
Sure, absolutely. I'm so excited to be here. And I have to say thank you to Ben and Caroline because they've been amazing as we prepared this session today. It really does tie into the importance of group thought and not just your own thought, because I came up with some ideas, but these guys really helped us formulate something today that I hope that will be really beneficial to everyone. You know, I have a few stories here. You see the picture there with Safra. This is a fun one for me. So a few years ago, I've been in the high-tech industry for about 26 years now. And I'm a rebounder here at Oracle. But before I came back to Oracle 6 months ago, back in 2017, I was a finalist for the Women Tech Council Awards, and Safra was the keynote speaker. So we got to do a little meet and greet with her. And so I hold this picture near and dear to my heart. It was fun coming back and having that. I thought it'd be a good one to share there. And Oracle's been a big part of my pastime. In fact, when we were meeting with Safra and going through with the other finalists, there's about 20 of them in the room. Half of them had worked at Oracle before. So Oracle generates some really good people. So, and it's things like this that they invest in their employees and they take that on and impact others around the world. So really, really fun. But I've worked in a number of different roles throughout my career. So I've been an engineer, I've been in technical sales, I've been in technical marketing, I've been in customer experience, and done a lot of various things, but always from a technology standpoint. So my background experience is in computer science and technology, and definitely love that aspect. And so in partnership with my career over the years, I've also had a very big passion for women in technology, as well as diversity. And so during my time at my prior role before coming back to Oracle, and I'll talk about my journey back into Oracle a little bit, I had the opportunity to be the president of eBay's Global Women in IT and Technology. We had about 1,500 members across 22 countries. And so I really had the opportunity over the many years that I was there to be really heavily invested into women in technology within eBay, as well as external consulting and work outside of eBay. So I have not only my job here at Oracle as Senior Director of CX Consulting, I run a company called Rise Next, and founded that in 2018 after many years of doing this type of work of helping women transition and finding their path, both men and women, not just women, where we're hiring for diversity and challenges, and there's all this opportunity, we're trying to hire for it, but how do we get more people interested and involved and engaged? And so I'm really excited to the work that I'm doing right now. I partner with 2 universities. I'm on a few boards with some of our local universities here in Salt Lake City, Utah. And we're launching a program called Mother Coders this fall, in which we help women understand the various opportunities in the tech industry. And we do training boot camps on UI, UX design, product management, cybersecurity, data science, and coding. So it's been a really fun night job for me. So I do my day job and then I do my night job. And I love both and have really appreciated the support that Oracle has had in me having these activities. And so continue that set of work in really driving that. And I think it's important for everyone to kind of identify their own passion. I have mine, obviously. But I think for all of you, I'm sure there's things you're in your mind that you're passionate about. And I found so much success and reward in bringing those things together over the years. Some of the other stories, and I thought it'd be fun to share a little story of why I'm back to Oracle. And this is a personal story. So just about a year and a half ago, I had been in discussions with consulting to come back and doing interviews, and actually did my first interview with Oracle in the hospital lobby after being biopsied for cancer. And after I had this prognosis that yes, you do have cancer, I had to call back Oracle and say, you know what? I'm going to have to go on pause. I've got some medical things I've got to deal with. And what was interesting for me is that I had been talking to Beth Bocher at the time. She actually wrote me a hand card letter and sent it to me saying, thank you for your time. It was great to be able to get to know you, and just in those few minutes being able to connect with somebody like that and have them respond. And in my current role, I had zero connection with my leader. In fact, they said, good luck. One note to tell everybody, when somebody has cancer, don't tell them good luck. That's just something not to do. Okay. And so, and they never checked in on me. They never said, are you all right? There was, I didn't have that. And you think about that as a leader. Are you connecting with your people at that level or not? And if you're not, that's true leadership, right? And so when I survived and I beat cancer, thank you, I'm a survivor. Woohoo! When I got through that experience, the first person I called back Oracle, and started the conversation back up again. And here I am, 6 months later, and now on the team and ready to go. So I thought that was fun to share both those stories with current leaders that we have at Oracle that are truly amazing and doing amazing things, and what we can learn from that. So a lot here is, I'm, like I said, I do a lot in the community, and have had a lot of success in writing and developing diversity programs. I had the opportunity to work in doing diversity strategy with eBay's Chief Diversity Officer, who is now the Chief Diversity Officer at Zoom. So a great gentleman, Damian Hooper Campbell, learned a lot from him. Just in the short time that I was able to do diversity strategy with him and learn and grow from that. So that's a little bit about me, and kind of intro of why I'm here today and talking. So
glad to have you back, Trina.
Yeah, thank you. Good to be back.
And I think one thing I just want to highlight before we jump into these points, I love that in all of those moments, right, it was a branding and leadership opportunity for Oracle. Like when you met Safra, she could have been, standoffish or not welcoming or not wanting to take a picture. When you had an interview with Beth, it could have been, like you weren't even an employee yet, and she was showing a lot of care. And I think like what we'll talk about today in the different pieces that you'll touch on is like how everyone can be a leader, and there are all these moments to consistently plug that into the work that people are doing at all sorts of levels. And that those two moments probably really affected your decision to come work here, and how much
Absolutely.
that's now benefiting us from all that.
Absolutely.
Awesome. And there are a lot of accolades or congratulations notes in the chat here too from folks in your stories.
Awesome. Rock on.
So let's keep telling some stories.
All right.
Different points here that I'd love for you to share with some people about how you kind of grew as a leader, and some of the moments that were instrumental in kind of getting you where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. I love telling stories, and I've got lots of them. So the first one I wanted to talk about, and what really it's about transformational leadership. When did I have a moment in looking back in my career that really defined me as a leader? And I had this amazing opportunity presented back in 2016 with eBay, that I kind of want to talk through that story, because there was a lot of things like I'm showing here, some bullet points on as I talk through that story that I really gleaned from. And so in 2015, actually, the end of 2015, eBay had a leadership conference in San Diego. And I was scheduled to attend, but when I showed up to the airport, they had actually canceled my flight without telling me. And I'm like, oh, okay, it's 3:00 in the afternoon. I'm supposed to be at the conference the next morning at 10 o'clock. How am I going to do this? Like I was like, I could have just stepped back and been like, no, I'm going to go home. There was some championship game or something on. I was like, I can just sit here and maybe skip it. But I had this gut feeling like, no, you need to be there, figure it out. And so I booked a flight. They didn't have any into San Diego, so I booked to LA, hired a driver, and he drove me at 1:00 in the morning down to San Diego so I could make this conference. And it was probably one of the biggest life-changing things for me, and a lot I'll talk about today. And just that power of showing up sometimes, like pushing through and just showing up, can really drive a change within your life. You just never know when something's going to change. And when you have that like, hey, I need to be there, or what am I going to do to get through? Just push through. Because what happened is when I showed up to the conference that day, they had a keynote speaker. Her name is Kathy Burke. And at the time, she was the CEO of the Global Hunger Project out of Australia. Amazing woman, became a close friend of mine. And she started to talk about this book she'd written called Unlikely Leaders. And in the book, it's examples of how the Global Hunger Project really approaches driving changing poverty. They tackle a lot of really big challenges in the world: childhood marriage, polygamy, extreme poverty and hunger. These are not simple things to solve for. And she was talking about how they do this. They only have a company, I think their nonprofit only has like 300 employees, but they are able to change millions of people's lives. And how they do that is through finding individuals that you do not assume are the leaders. Sometimes we have this perspective of who is a leader. It's, they look like this, or they act like this, or, they have this long resume, and, you know what? No, everybody is a leader. And if you're in a leadership formal position, your job is to find out who the leaders are in your team and empower them and pull that out of them. And she had shared a lot of very specific examples that just really resonated with me. And really probably was how that moment where I went, I'm that leader. I'm that person, right? Each one of us should be having that mindset shift that Carolyn was talking about, where that mindset shift is now everybody is a leader. Everybody has the opportunity to change. And just one short story about this, and the ability to empower others, and understanding and finding their purpose that they're going to get excited about and go, I get this. I understand the why. I know why we're doing this. I'm going to go and I'm going to make this happen. It's not going to be the people you think it is. It's going to, I'm telling you, you start putting that out there, you're going to find people that resonates. You put the why and the purpose out there, and they're going to step up, and you're going to be amazed. They'll just go. And she shared this one story about a village that she went to in India where within this area, the women weren't even allowed to wear shoes. They were treated kind of the same level as livestock almost. And one of the biggest things, and we'll talk about briefly here in just a moment, is the power to change people really comes from the inside, and then they take the action. And they went in and had these conversations, and one woman said, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to just stand up for us to be able to wear shoes. And that was it. That was the symbol. And this woman went to the local communities over and over and over again. I mean, literally, she said that she would walk into the offices. They would pick her up with chair and all and chuck her out the door. But she didn't stop. And she kept going. She kept going. She kept going. And to the point where not only did she get it to have them start wearing shoes, that was just a start. She eventually got girls into schools, got education, just because she kept pushing, kept showing up, saying, hey, this needs to change. This isn't right. I feel like this, and sticking with it. And sometimes you just have to show up. You have to remove fear and doubt. Like, I remember when they told me, so at the end of this conference, they announced they were going to be doing a trip in partnership with the Global Hunger Project. And part of this trip, I didn't know what it was, but I had this like, you're going to go. Like, I just knew it. I'm like, you're going to go. And they had a year-long application process, and you had to be selected and this whole thing. And it was really interesting because when they came back and they said, out of everybody that had applied, we knew you were the one that was going to go across the whole everybody. So there was something there. You never know. Those moments where it's like, this is where you're supposed to be. And so I was selected to go on this trip in partnership with the Global Hunger Project and be able to learn leadership examples from the people of Senegal, Africa. And so that's kind of the story I wanted to share today, which was how they do this, how they do transformation, and how you apply that in each of the transformations we're trying to do within North America Consulting at our clients internally, right? There's opportunity for mindset shift and transformation everywhere. So how do we do that? So let's go to the next slide. Their approach and how I'm going to apply this for today is the first thing that they do is you've got to empower everyone. In their case, they really start by empowering women, because if they're not at the table and starting to contribute, They identify all the key change agents. And we're going to talk a little bit about this, of like identifying your key stakeholders within your projects. How do you do that? And so you need to make sure you understand and know who everybody is at the game. In this case, it was with women. We were in a village talking to the chiefs about this, actually. Kathy asked the chief of the village, what was it like the first time you started to include women in decision making? Because typically it was just all men. And he said, at first we were really scared. We thought we were going to lose our power. And I, it was kind of a kick to my gut at first when he said this, but then I started going, he went on, I'm like, you're not going to lose your power. Like, I know this, but not everybody is at the same place. And you have to be open-minded about this, right? And he went on, he said, what actually ended up happening when we started to include everyone and identifying the key people and not excluding people, that things actually got a lot easier. We found out that women actually knew a lot about healthcare and education, and their decision making within the community became a lot easier because of this. And so really trying to mobilize or create change within society or a project or within your family or on a personal level, right? There's, how do we actually make sure everybody has a voice, and empowering and enabling those people to come forward. The next step they do there is mobilize the entire communities into self-reliant action. And they do that, like I said, by first, we've got to have this mindset shift. We got to talk about what the real problems are, and why you're having those problems, understand where they're at. There's a whole conversation that's happening, right? Similar, like you go into a new project, a new deal, you're starting to create awareness of the current problems. What's your current state? Why does that need to change, right? And get people to start opening up to it as an idea. Then once you get their mindset in a place of like acceptance, then you go into mobilizing those teams. Okay, we've got to now drive and identify who are those mobilizers, who are the people that are animators that are passionate and can help us drive this change. Who are those people? And we're going to talk about some strategies for being able to do that. And then really having effective partnerships to engage the government. They work with other nonprofits, being able to bring everybody in. How do you get all those people together to be able to make this shift and change? And you can see here, they're targeting a lot of things they're solving for, right? Clean sanitation, nutrition, education, women's empowerment, the environment, putting microfinancing. I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot they're taking on. But it all starts with this first step of why and what mindset shift we're going to make. So one of the things that I learned within that trip and that whole experience, if you want to go to the next slide, is this concept of VCA, vision, commitment, action. And as I was talking to Carolyn and Ben, I was like, I had story after story of like how I'm dealing with these challenges on a day-to-day basis right now. Every single one, I'm like, oh my gosh, here's what I'm dealing with in vision right now. Like, not everybody gets it. Not everybody's on the same page, what we're doing or why. I've got detractors. I've got people that aren't committed. They're not on board. I've got to continually be going back and saying, how come I can't get this group on board? Who do I need to work with to get them on board? And then action, day-to-day execution. How do we actually get this thing out the door, staying on track, keep people engaged, right? It's ongoing work. And there's times I have to step back. And even this week, as we were putting this together and saying, oh, I've got a vision problem. That's what's going on. Or, oh, I've got commitment issues. Or we're not executing, right? It gives you kind of a simple framework to step back and say, where am I in my projects and what's working, what's not, and where do I maybe need to focus at a high level? So that's the three pillars that we're going to, I learned through this experience that we're going to talk through today.
Trina, one thing I love about this and in hearing the origin story and why we push you to share that story is that leadership isn't, there's some natural qualities to it, but it's kind of with those 4 stories you shared, it's like this accumulation of experience and borrowing from all sorts of different different things that you've experienced throughout your life and saying, oh, vision, commitment, action, it was used in the example with the hunger project that you shared. But I think it was so cool to see how you are borrowing that and applying it to consulting, which could not be more on the opposite end of a spectrum in terms of work. But what we're really talking about are lessons about people, right? And that the same threat that people have about including women in leadership conversations, and that same kind of like reaction that we also have in our clients about shifting the way that they work or trying to do something new. And I think it's great to see the origin stories of some of these things. I'm going to pause here real quick to see, does anyone on the call have any questions about any of the things or comments that Trina has shared so far? If you want to come off mute and just speak up, we would definitely welcome that. Or if you'd rather use the chat, we can pause for a moment and let you type. But we're going to dive into each of these three, but I just wanted to see if anyone wanted to chime in. All right. Let's jump into some of these stories, Trina.
Okay. So I'm going to just share three. There were so many. I mean, we were on the road, 8 hours a day, traveling to villages. There were so many great examples as we went through, but I thought there was three that I could talk through that really resonated as far as vision, commitment, and action. And so Neon's first one is on the vision and changing mindsets. So keep in mind, the goal here is we go into each one of these epicenters or group of villages. It's about 15,000 people, and we went to 3 of them. And so you're going into this large group of people that are very embedded in their current mindset. And I mean, raise of hands, how many people have gone into a client where they're just so set in their mindset? And I got one up there. I'm seeing a couple hands. Like that mindset shift is really, I'm seeing a few more great, really trying to get them to understand why they need to change. And for her, in this example, was understanding the importance of autonomy. And for her, it was like, oh, I can go start my own business. I can get a microloan and start a catering business, and I don't have to rely on anybody else. That self-empowerment mindset shift was all it took for her to go, oh, I get it. I can go and make all of these changes, and I don't need to wait on anybody else. I'm not codependent on my husband. I don't have to wait for the chief. I don't have to, I can just go do this. And what happens is in solving poverty is that when especially women are investing back into their 90% of their income goes back into those families, those societies, they're generating and have their own income, they become self-reliant. That's how you affect change from the ground up, right? So for her, it was just getting that mindset shift and awareness of oh, I don't have to wait on somebody else. I can go do this. So that's kind of the same thing we can do with our clients of oh, this isn't on somebody else to go do. I can go do this and I can help in making that change, right? The next one is on commitment. So we're gonna deep dive a little bit more into this, but there was a woman, and you'll see her there with the book and the little boy looking at that. It's one of my favorite pictures from my time there, because you can see his mindset shifting, right? And so they have these roles called animators and mobilizers. They're kind of like your change agents or subject matter experts that are passionate and driving change throughout the community. And this woman, they started nicknaming her Hunger because she was so passionate and so engaged and so driven for change. They're like, oh, here comes Hunger. And that was her nickname because they said it was a little bit we got tired of hearing her, so we just decided to change. And it tied into how much are we communicating and communication plans, and how much it takes constant work to drive commitment to change. And you have to be out on the front lines, restating, reiterating, recommunicating, and that was what she was doing time and time and time again. And then the last example I was going to share is with Amit, and he was what they called a mobilizer. So once you get past vision and commitment, you're mobilizing, right? You're driving action. And his quote was, action is the hardest part. You can have a great vision, you can have everybody say that they're committed, but when you hit the ground and you're running and you are trying to drive significant change on a daily basis, you're in the war zone. You're going, and you're having to remove barriers, you're having to knock down things, remove risks, issues, get people aligned. It's constant work. So knowing that you're mobilizing and continually doing that, and focusing on that action part and making sure it continues so it doesn't fizzle out, right? So we're going to talk about some tactics on how you can really drive action there.
All right, so let's jump into this from a consulting perspective. So I love that foundation, Trina. And for everybody, we're going to now dive each into the vision, commitment, and action. Trina has some great, I would put great in quotes for some of these stories and how this is playing out on some of the projects that she has right now and where she's seen it. And again, as you have questions, please feel free to jump in. If you hear something where you're like, that makes sense, but how do you do it? What does this look like at the client? Use the chat, come off mute, and jump in.
All right. So has anybody heard of Simon Sinek? This big author, speaker. Okay, love that. Love him, like in his mantra. And it really, his big thing, I think, I can't remember how many years ago when I first saw a presentation from him, is like, first thing you got to do is get to the why. Why are we doing any of this, right? And if you don't understand it, you got a problem. If your teams don't understand it, you have a problem. Or if the people that are going to be receiving and delivering don't understand it, you've got a problem. So does everybody understand why we're doing this, right? And just, I would say even in my current projects, I was like I said, I was talking to Caroline, I'm like, oh, I got to go back to my why. Do I understand it? Because maybe that's why we're having a lot of this contention, as they think we're doing this for one reason. I think we're doing it for another reason. Are we aligned? And if you don't have a why statement or a vision statement of what you're trying to drive to, you're going to have continual problems as you work through and start executing. And so start at the very beginning. Why are we doing this? Do I know? Have I communicated it? And then we're going to talk about, you have to keep recommunicating it. It's not like a one and done, right? I don't go, oh, here's why, and then 8 months later, everybody still understands it. It should be part of your ongoing conversations and engagement on, here's our goals, here's what we're working towards, here's why we're doing it, and making sure that's clear. And so I would say kind of like vision setting, first starting determining where are you at in setting your vision, either a current project you're on and in the middle of, or one that you're framing up and starting to set. Do you have a clear understanding of that? There are some projects that I've just recently been pulled into where this is where I'm starting. Do I understand why we're doing this? First of all, do I understand what needs to change, and are the mindsets, where are the mindsets at currently, and what challenges might I have going into a client or a customer and their current mindset, and what mindsets need to shift, because having a kind of like a mind map, and we're going to talk about I think the next slide a little bit on understanding where your clients are at, and kind of categorizing them and knowing who you need to target for this vision sharing reminder alignment exercise, because you're going to want to make sure everybody agrees where you're going, why you're going, not just the leaders, because it's not the leaders that are executing, right? You need to make sure everybody's on board and in the same alignment. So let me pause there. Questions on vision and getting to it.
I'll just share, Sharad in the chat was saying, many times customers do not have the vision or clarity on why the project has started, and that's why a lot of projects don't see the light of day.
Yeah.
That's totally true.
It's so true. Without a vision, clarity, you're gonna have constant interruptions. You're gonna have constant delays. You're gonna have people going and doing something completely different. One of the things that I wanted to mention that was I found really intriguing with the Global Hunger Project is they are very particular on their goals. They have, and every epicenter and all those villages, they know what their goals are because they're driving for self-reliance. And there are very specific milestones and targets and goals that line up to this big vision. It's not just a big broad, oh, we really want everybody to be happier, right? That's not the goal. It's there are, we have to have businesses running. We need to have women's empowerment. Here's the goals for that. Here's where we need to have healthcare standards. Here's all the goals for that. And it's very detailed, and it's written down and communicated continually. So, vision isn't a vague thing. It's getting down into, yes, I have a big goal, but how do I break that down into key milestones, deliverables, and goals and targets so that you can check in and make sure you're tracking to those. And when that's missing, you start slipping and sliding. You don't have the guardrails. You're going to be, off somewhere else you didn't plan on. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Was there any other comments or questions?
I think one of the other things that I've seen, when executing the project is, sometimes it happens that, the top leadership may have vision, but that vision doesn't goes down, well with the project team that is executing. They may say, that you should have world-class, software and things like that.
Yeah.
And should use out of the box and things like what you have seen. But when it goes into execution, that vision is not converted into the actual, project objective what is required, and that results into, miscommunication and gaps, and frustration across team, basically on both sides.
Yeah, that's that commitment phase, right? Because you can set the vision, but until you start communicating and getting people on board, it's just a vision statement. It's not actionable, right? So, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more too, about how do we, I think that's a great segue into getting into commitment. Was there another comment? I think I saw one more come up here.
Victoria just said that she was on a project for core HR and absent management, and the customer asked, what was the hurry? And she said, I had to explain what the contract and project plan looked like. Not really my forte, but I was honest and excited, ready to get it done. He had no clue what his role was. Not an Oracle consulting company, but a partner. He was difficult the entire time.
Yeah.
And actually, I think that this is a perfect segue
It
to
is.
our next slide.
It is. It's
Victoria,
awesome.
You're a great plant.
Thank you, Victoria.
Always my pleasure. They're attracted to me. They love me.
So, Carolyn, do you want to? I know this is one that we've worked on adding in. Do you want to give a high-level overview here, and then we can talk through a little bit more here?
Sure. Every project is different, and it's populated with unique perspectives. Everybody who's on the team has their own point of view, their own experiences, their own maybe like bias or prejudice, but also like their own motives. It's important to take stock of the stakeholders on your team and understand where they're at mentally when you start working with them. The idea is, trying to get people who are unaware aware, trying to get people who are resistant unlock what it is, like what is their motivation, why are they resistant. Most people aren't resistant just because they're contrarian and they like to be difficult. It's because there's some sort of fear of the unknown, or they feel left behind or left out. it's up to us to really ask those questions, like keep asking why when you feel stuck, and sooner or later you'll unlock the key of like, oh, they're being difficult because they're worried their job won't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Like that. And there's almost always a solution where you can find a way to engage them. I would also say, like, it helps to have those people with a different point of view. If you're never being challenged, you're never going to innovate, and you get kind of like mired in the status quo. So there's the spectrum here, from unaware all the way up to leading. Like, leading is different than supportive, right? Because they're taking a more like a bigger stake in the project. They're able to be the difference between success or failure, right? Whereas supportive is just like a cheerleader in your corner, like, yeah, we're doing this and I'm happy we're doing it. And then neutral, I think that's a tricky one, because it's hard to imagine, right, in these scenarios where there's such passionate feelings one way or the other, to have those people sitting in the middle. But I think if you engage them, they can be really helpful as well, especially in these moments where you're like at an impasse. Having that true neutral point of view can help you see things that maybe other people are blind you, if that makes sense.
It does. Absolutely. And I think that's just for me, this is a daily, this is that action part, right? Every day I'm like, okay, why did they make that comment in the meeting? Or why are we not able to move forward here? What's going on? And I've got people in every one of these buckets. And sometimes you've got those that are leading, and they're just probably just as, start hitting these detractors or, resistant mindsets continually. It's like, okay, step back. How do I re-engage and get their mindset shifted? There are times where you're just not going to get them. They're going to just stay resistant. You've got those people. What I found is, rather than keep trying to push there, I find ways around, right? I have to get creative. Not always does it work, but I just go, okay, they're just going to be resistant. I get it. I'm not going to be able to change them, no matter how many one-on-ones and conversations and things I have. And they say, yep, I agree with you, Trina. And then the next minute they're off doing something else again, right? You're just like, okay, I got to step back and do something different. Maybe I'm not investing my time in the right places or the right people. Let me go back to my leaders. Let me go back to my change agents. Let me go back to those that can help influence and circumvent that issue or that person. This is really helpful to just kind of, so you're not continually hitting brick walls and driving yourself crazy. If there's just sometimes you're going to just be that way, and it's okay. That's what I've gotten to is like, it's okay. Well, I'll work with the people that are supportive and are advocates, and making sure you have those. If you don't have those, we need to create them. You've got to start working on building relationships and building advocates and getting leaders. So I think in reaching alignment, that commitment phase, right? So knowing that you may have detractors or resistors, but most everybody, if it's coming in and they know that this is something that we should be doing, we just maybe don't know why. Okay, well, let's get to the why. What are your priorities? Understanding those. If you're working with other contractors, that's always something to understand, because that's going to be a mindset difference, right, than the employees that might be working there. If they have different goals, what are your goals? It doesn't hurt to ask them that. What are your goals on this project? Making sure you're aligned frequently. But you do have to get everyone you can on board before you can move on. And going through that exercise of really what I've done to make that happen is definitely having the vision statement, here's why we're doing it, but having it, like I've even launched meetings and having it be like the beginning of every meeting of like, it's just like they see it, right? Like, oh, here's the vision statement, and it's on the very first slide of every deck I ever do. Something like that. It doesn't have to be that. Or I used to do bring them along, and we'll talk about this kind of like in the journey, but just making sure everybody has the same vision. It's repeated, it's heard, people know it. Like it's that repeated communication. It takes time and effort, which is the hard part because you're trying to do everything else too. But this making sure that you're sticking with it, recommunicating it, and reaffirming it. Because how many of you have ever been on a project? I'm gonna ask another question. You've been on a project and all of a sudden the vision shifted, but nobody really said anything about it. It just,
Does anyone want to come off mute and admit that?
Yeah, or share an
Maybe talk about
example.
it? Anybody?
Yeah, I have been on a lot of international global projects, especially with European counterparts and like led from North America. I'm originally from Germany, so what I found is helpful to like understand also the culture of your team members, especially if you have global teams. There's like different ways of communication, different ways how to approach an project, and different needs for different people based on their cultural backgrounds, also to feel comfortable. And like the vision setting, I think it's so critical. But what I have seen often, that maybe the senior leadership has a vision. It's really bad if you also have the political wrangling between like maybe the European leadership versus the North America leadership from the client as well. On an international project, and one of the sides might not feel empowered in the project and feel like more it's pushed down their throat. So really bringing the team then together and addressing their concerns, and also hopefully can convince the client that there is an issue and how we can address those challenges together and align the team. I think that's really important. So I have seen that more than once on my project.
Yeah, you brought up a couple of things that are really good. One is recognizing cultural differences. One of the benefits of really identifying change agents in the organizations that are local that can be that voice of trust. So a lot of the projects I've run, I will go out and identify one person in each organization in all the regions, right? That says, you are the leader, you own this project, and it's a teammate of the fellow team. Because then their voice is going to be, if it's coming from me, it's not going to mean as much, some outsider consultant, than it would be from their own teammate who's saying, hey, we're going to do this project. They understand the vision, they know the why, and they can help drive that mindset shift and change within the team. And it helps build, as well as they understand the cultural differences, right? Or the approach might be different, right? Everybody has their own authentic way of leading through change, and you have to rely on that. It can't just be pushed. Like you were saying, they feel like things are being pushed on them, and that feeling of like, oh, somebody else is forcing me, rather than stepping back, getting people that are close to them to help drive the change, and having them say, here's the value proposition to you. Here's the value proposition to the business. Here's the big picture of why. Because if we don't do this, we're not going to be able to compete in the marketplace, and the whole business is going to go under, and guess what? That's jobs. So whatever that vision statement, purpose, value proposition is, leverage, you can say it, but maybe find people in each of those regions to be your change agents and spokespersons to drive that commitment. Very good points.
So in the interest of time, Caroline, can we hop to the poll slide? I'm gonna launch a quick poll asking you a little bit about a recent project. So you should see this pop up on your screen. Think of a recent client. How many people on the client team understood the vision of the project? And then what percentage of people agreed with the vision or the mission, right? So there's understanding and then there's agreement, and we're going to get into that commitment to agreement piece in a second. And then the last piece, which I think is also interesting, how many people on your internal team understood the vision? So we have two different groups here. We're talking about the internal and the client. Answers coming in right now. Got a little bit more time to fill this out. Let's take 10 more seconds. All right, wrap up your answers. End it. I'm going to share these out. So with the first question, think of a recent client. How many people on the client team understood the vision? About 44% said most people. We also had some people and no one. That's always really tricky. Then this one is interesting. What percentage of people agreed with the mission or the vision? About most people said about half, right? So had some above, some below, but even at 75%, that's not everybody that's fully on board. And then how many people in your internal team understood? Most people. So that's good that at least, with our teams as consultants, we understand it. But as we'll get into in a minute, it's one thing to understand, it's another thing to actually be on board. But before we jump into the commitment piece, we pushed Trina to give us some strategies, right? So we obviously know that vision is important, but what can we do actually take back to our projects some tactics that we could use? So Trina, do you want to run through these?
Yeah. Whenever you're kicking off a project, or maybe like me, I came into a project that had been multi-years in progress already, which is a big challenge, right? So one of the first things that is really incredibly important to understand the current mindset to talk to a lot of people. And it takes time, right? You know, reaching out to multiple people. So when I came in, I actually scheduled one-on-ones with all the leadership teams, but no, I didn't just go there. I scheduled one-on-ones or meetings with the project teams. And one of the challenges, I'll say this isn't always easily done, because I still, at this moment, 6 months later, I'm not allowed to work directly with the business teams. I'm not allowed to go out and check mindsets. I'm not allowed, right? So I've got barriers to getting this done like I would on a normal project. And so I have to work through people. And so this game of telephone isn't always a good thing, because I'm asking and trying to understand where they're at, but then they put their bias or what they think and they want to communicate, and I'm not getting real answers. And over the last month, I've had to really push to say no more. Get us on the phone with the business teams, because I don't think we're heading on the right track, or I don't think we're getting the right answers. And it's not always liked, right? They're not always a fan. I'll have to say that. But it's critical. I need to understand where they're really at. What is really going on here, and being able to get engaged more directly with the downstream teams in order to drive forward success, because we're getting held up and I can't move forward. So really understanding, talking to multiple people, multiple levels, multiple teams, doing check-ins, regularly. How you doing? How are things going? And being able to, it also helps in building trust in the team that you're listening, right? So I think that's important. And then determine what it'll take to get people on board. What do they need? What's their, listen to them. What's the value proposition for them? If they don't understand it, help them understand it. What needs to happen on a more regular basis so that, that's holding them back from being able to move forward. I have meetings on this every day. This is This is not like I got everybody on board and away we go again. No, I get this team on board, then I get this team, and then I have to work this person, and then this is what you do, like, to get alignment. It's continual discussions. What's holding us up? Why is it holding us up? What do we need? Hopefully you guys have felt that too. And then if you're having it happen too often and you are spending a lot of time, maybe step back and go, how can I document and communicate the vision better? Because maybe that's what's been going on, and why I'm in these meetings every day is the vision has been altered or shifted, or the people aren't aligned. And so this is an opportunity even for me right now to go back and say, okay, let's go back to our vision. Is everybody on the same page? Because I seem to be spending a lot of times in alignment meetings and explaining this. So let's step back, make sure we're on the same page, and go forward from there. And don't be afraid to ask for feedback. Incorporate it. Really listen, saying, I'm not aligned because this, maybe it's a good reason, and oh yeah, I didn't think about that. Let's see what we need to do to alter our timelines or shifts, or maybe we don't do something or we add something, right? There's those times. Other times it might just be go back to I'm a resistor and I'm just not aligned. Listen to what they're saying and then try and help identify which it is, right? And really try and understand it.
Dina, I have a quick question for you.
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt. You mentioned alignment and talking about how you getting everyone on the same page, and you also talked about Simon Sinek earlier and his start with why.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's got to be a huge piece of getting everyone on the same page about a vision. It's not just saying, like, here's the statement, this is where we're going, this is where we're going, this is where we're going,
Mm-hmm.
but communicating, like, why we decided that that's where we want to go. So how do you encourage, like, and communicate kind of what the reason for the vision is? Like, is that a piece of the vision communication, or is that something you end up talking to each individual, like, group about?
It's both, but you do have to start from the top. And right now, even this coming week, I'm having this vision recommit to the vision again with the leadership teams. So there's, depending upon what challenges you're seeing in your current delivery, kind of makes the decision. If I'm seeing leadership dissension and they're pulling different directions, or they're not supportive because they're like, I don't know if I'm aligned to this vision. I literally had that happen this week. So what I've got to step back and get my leadership back aligned on what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then from there, making sure it's clear and documented, and then recommunicate it. Like, hey, all right, leader, I'm just going to call them leader. Leader, we're now realigned. Can you please send this communication reaffirming what our vision is and what our approach is to solving this down? Can we distribute it? I would work through the PMO that we have at our local client, or whoever you have on board to help with communications. But I would ask them to I think we need to, because we weren't aligned. I'm sure the teams aren't aligned either. Let's maybe do a broad communication of that. One of the other things I've done is I would do regular comms plans, and I haven't seen those within my current deliveries at Oracle right now. I think it's something that, from a project delivery, is really helpful as far as reaffirming the project across all teams. I see communications to the leadership. I don't see communications going down to the people that are going to be receiving and having to start working within a new delivery. And so I used to put a timeline together that had a little star on it. And I'd be like, here's the project, timeline. You are here, right? And here's the next things we're doing. And you are here now. And kind of bring them along the journey with you, right? Like so you don't have to always be having those conversations. But I can see that's why I'm in the meetings I'm having to re-explain things. And it's because at the very top, I've got to go back and reaffirm our vision and re-communicate it back down.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you so much, Trina.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? Okay. Should we move on to the...
Yeah, let's jump into commitment, because I think that this is where we're getting to. Once you have that vision set, and I think the reason why we spend so much time talking about that, Trina, is it's so important, right? This is the foundation that everything else is built off.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's shaky or people are unsure about it or they kind of just signed off on it, then these next two pieces, commitment and action, you're building up on a really unstable foundation.
Yep. So this really ties into our earlier conversation on understanding your stakeholders. But once you have that vision, know who I'm sure everybody's done a RACI stakeholder map, right? That's pretty typical in all of our deployments, really understanding who's helping drive the project, who's receiving the project. But I would categorize them almost a little bit differently if you take not just their role, but what's their, like, how are they helping me get this project out the door? And so you have leaders, right? Start with their commitments to removing barriers, enabling people. Who are those people? Who are my mobilizers? Who are the ones that are going to be driving continuous understanding of the vision and retain that commitment? So like you were just asking, Mackenzie, on how do you keep them engaged? Is that regular communication? Do you have like a communication plan for the project, not after the project, during the project? What's your communication plan? Drive continuous understanding of the vision, retain that commitment, making sure that people understand it. Yes, we're still going. I've had that question, like, are we still even doing this? Like, yeah, we're doing it, right? Like, where did that come from, right? So let's make sure that we've got that mobilization function or people that are helping mobilize the teams continually. And then the animators, who are our change agents? Do I know who they are? How do I leverage them? What meetings do I pull them into? How do I keep them? We had done a proof of concept a few months ago, and it worked really well because what they did, and I would love to do this through the rest of the project, but we only did it on the POC, and I'm not sure why. What we did is, as we built the product and we're doing a demo to the leadership, we actually brought in the business teams and they did the demo. We didn't do it because then they were like, oh, the business teams get it. They know how to use it. It's actually a real thing and we leveraged the subject matter experts or the animators, and they know the business better than we do, or should, right? So they would be able to talk to their day-to-day business experience and their why this is good for them, and then guess what happens is they get on board because now they've been accountable, not somebody else, right? So you're got that shift going. It's like, oh, I actually own this, I'm part of it, it's mine, not Oracle.
Trina, I love the idea of the animators. What is something you look for in an animator? I think that's like, for me at least, when we were talking about this was a new kind of like group of people that I don't think we often talk about. We talk about leaders and we talk about mobilizers, but what are the traits of a really good and effective animator?
Yeah, I would say start with your business units you're deploying to. So understanding your business and who those businesses are, and then talking to the leadership teams and saying, who is your most trusted person on the team? And also who, sometimes you want to get your resistors to be those people. Because sometimes I'll even ask them, I'm like, who doesn't want to do this project the most? And then I make them my subject matter expert. So, if I've got, it's kind of a little trick I've used to go, okay, who's going to be the one that's going to be most problematic? And I turn them into my change agent. So it's not always, like I said, your unlikely leaders in those groups that can really, who's going to be the biggest influencer? If you can get your detractors to actually be your change agents, people are going to trust them because they came over to, understanding. They're going to be able to help with that same mindset shift with the rest of their teams.
Great. Caroline, let's skip to the chart. Yeah, and Trina, I know this is a very basic version of kind of a stakeholder map, but
Yeah.
this is, Bianca was asking about this, is it in TCM Plus? But I think in our follow-up materials, Bianca, we'll have kind of our version of this to share. But Trina, how would you use this, or whether it's actually a document you create or mentally kind of, walking through and trying to fill this out for a project?
Yeah, it's been a mental thing. And what's been nice about doing this lab is it's actually formalized what I do on a day-to-day basis. So I agree, and kind of having this be a formalized process is extremely helpful, because what I found is I do this as, like I said, this has been it's a shift, right? When I own the project end to end and I can just say, okay, I'm going to go do this. We're more often than not the influencers, not the drivers. We can't force anything. Like if I own the team, it's so much easier, right? If I was the manager and I just say, hey, this is what we're doing, let's go. But similar to the Hunger Project, you're just influencing. So how do you do that? You have to get people on board. So really going through, build out your stakeholder maps, build out your races, just like you do today. And that is in, I think I've heard it called 2 in the box. I've heard it called a few other things, but that stakeholder map, make sure it's got the business units identified. It doesn't have to be, at least the leaders that you're going to be deploying to, I think is helpful. And then take those and identify who on there are our leaders, who are the mobilizers. It's kind of like just an overlay of that. And then, okay, do I have animators on here? And I think often that's where we don't have those change agents identified within the project. And so, and then of those, where are they at as far as their support? Your animators, you definitely want them to be your on board and pushing and passionate about the project. And so how do I get them? You're going to give them tons of information. The other thing about the animators, I would say, is I use them as communication channels. So when I'm talking about sending out vision and progress and where we're at and bringing them along, my distribution list for my comms plans include the animators, and they're brought so that, because they're going to help drive the change downstream.
Does anyone have any questions? Oh yeah, someone's go.
Do you think it's ever possible for an animator to be hiding behind neutral or resistant? Or are they usually like the supporters?
Yeah, I think they're supporters, and sometimes they ebb and flow through those types, because the other challenge that we have is we don't get to dictate their workload. And so sometimes it can become problematic where they're very supportive, they're leading, and next thing you know, they're like neutral or resistant because they're getting conflicting priorities, or something is shifted, right? So they may start one place and move another, hopefully towards leading, not backwards, but you do have the backwards flow. And so it's just those constant check-ins. I would have ongoing meetings with my change agents and say, okay, monthly check-in with our change agents. How you doing? What's going wrong? What do you need? Communicate. And like I said, communication channel, just to keep them in that leading supportive role, ongoing.
Trina, this sounds like a lot of work.
Oh, you are so right. It is. But that's what, it goes back to that comment the chief made. It's a lot of work to get them on board and in there. But once you get them going, guess what? You're taking that off you. You don't have to be the one pushing all the time. So yes, this part is important, and getting those identified and getting them on the ground and getting them communication. But they're going to do the rest of the work for you. They're going to be bringing the teams along, getting their engagement, making sure that they're informed, right? So it is a lot of work. It's probably why it skipped over at the beginning, but it does long-term allow for more success downstream. Adoption rates definitely are a big win here when you follow this model.
It almost makes me remind me of like planning a trip, right? You like do all your research on the hotels and you plan out your itinerary and you make sure that, you know, you're hitting the spots that everyone in your family wants to go to and all these things on the front end, so you don't just show up to wherever you're going. Oh wait, we don't have a hotel. Oh wait, you wanted to go do this activity and I wanted to go do this other thing.
Yeah.
So spending, you know, a bunch of time on the front end to make sure everything's set up so that when you get there or when the project is underway, all the structures are in place for things to go smoothly.
Yeah. It reminds me.
We have a couple questions up here on the screen of just thinking about a project. Does anyone want to come up, mute, and share their perspective on who some of these people were on their project? Any brave soul? I'm patient. Okay, that's all right. But I think that one thing, Trina, that you said, you know, that even just going through this and kind of putting all this together was important for you was just to be reminded of these questions. And even though this is your leadership style and all about the things that you already know, to just be reminded of, oh, wow, yeah, the pieces about the vision and am I, you know, contacting and using the animators the right way? Do I have my mobilizers lined up? You know, these are questions that you don't just answer one good, but are kind of constantly on your brain to make sure you're reassessing throughout the project.
Yeah. I think that one thing that Carolyn brought up, and I would love for you to share this, that I thought was really good. So one of the other things is the change agents usually are people that will be owning this when you're done, right? So who are you transitioning this all to downstream? And one of the gaps I see is us not having those identified up front. And so then you are done with the project and you're like, okay, who's this going to go to? Right? And so your mobilizers and your animators might actually be who's going to own and operate and maintain this once Oracle's gone. So Carolyn, you had a really good analogy that I loved about kind of doctors and their like thinking through it that way. Do you want to share that real quick? Because I think it's a good point.
This is a good segue into action. So that's when it really came up for us in our conversations was when we were pitching Texas Children's Hospital, we had to do a prescriptive approach and they had a very tight timeline and a very tight budget. So we had to completely restructure the proposal we had done a year before, which was very co-solution, transformation, and now they wanted something like state money, right? So we had to find a way to present this idea of like the glide path. I don't know, have y'all heard of the glide path? They've been talking about it a lot in delivery excellence. Essentially, it's our way of building knowledge transfer and like ownership transfer throughout every stage of the project and not just cramming it in at the very end, like, okay, now it's yours, bye, peace out, Oracle out, drop the mic. And when we were talking to Texas Children's Hospital, that analogy came up, like, if you want to be a surgeon, you don't just like say, okay, I graduated college, I'm going to walk into this operating room and see what happens. I've got a scalpel, let's go, right? Like you go to medical school for years, you learn by listening and absorbing a ton of lectures and information, and then you do your residency, your internship in a variety of settings, right? And it's time for you to shadow somebody who's like a seasoned veteran who's done everything and seen everything. And you learn by observing, and then you get hands-on where you're the one doing it and you're being shadowed by the expert. And all of that happens so that when you get to the place where now you're the surgeon and you're on your own, you've had all of that build up to it where you're not freaking out or scaring people by just being like, I've never done this before, you know? So it's kind of like we need to be really mindful of every phase in the project, building those moments in and making it less scary or like soothing the fear of the unknown.
Great, thanks, Carolyn.
I think that ties into number 3 here, right? Of like the constant recommitment to the vision and the things that we're asking of people, you know, constantly. And Trina, I like what you've been talking about communication, right? It's not a one project welcome email and then one email, you know, 6, 8, 18 months later of, hey, here's your new system, good luck. It's kind of constantly being in touch with everybody, letting them know what's going on. See that last one there about you are here, you know, just like keeping people involved, giving them a chance to tweak things or ask questions or engage, and making sure that the people are with you every part of the way versus just sprinting ahead and hoping that they're following along behind you.
Yeah. And there's a balance to this, right? Because you can it's a balance. I'm gonna put it this way. So there's communicating, bringing people along, communicating outward. You have feedback cycles that have risk in them, where if you get too caught up in continual feedback, questions, training, clarifications, you're never going to make progress. And so you're having to find this balance of like communicating just to the right level, and engaging at the right level to get enough to be able to get a valid solution definition done, but not overdoing it to the point where you're now like, we can't move forward because there's so many questions, so many clarifications, so like how to mitigate that, and making sure that you have, a lot of the project teams I've seen is like, well, I have to have everything figured out before we could move forward because I'm not comfortable. I hear that a lot. I'm not comfortable, right? Well, we're going to have to get comfortable with enough, and then as we go, right? So it's explaining, really being with still that engagement and talking through of like, look, we're still going to have sufficient enough. Let me explain it to a point, but at some point we're going to have to move forward too. So there's a balance here that I think is very real, and I don't want to disregard that it just goes smoothly and every time, right?
All right, and then our last section around action. Once we finally built the vision and finally had people commit, we have all of our stakeholders on board, we can finally get into action. But I think, Trina, as you'll talk about, it's not as simple as just, okay, now everybody go.
Yep. I wish. That'd be great. Oh my, let's just, okay, we got it all planned out. Okay, just go. Empowering the team with information, understanding, detail enough that they're feeling like they have ownership. This concept of ownership is one that I think as I set up projects in the future, really being very cognizant of creating the shared ownership of the project. So empowering them with roles and responsibilities where they have ownership, and then just removing barriers of what might prevent us from getting there. And this goes back to hearing them, because you're not going to be able to identify any of those barriers unless you've spoken to them and understood what their current challenges are within the environment that you're not going to be able to identify. It's better to have those conversations up front, and be able to mitigate them in the beginning. And then who's owning this when I'm gone? We talked about this a little bit already, is who's that transition team? How do I engage them up front? Carolyn, great analogy of you've got to bring them along with you. And you get better design and understanding of what you're delivering to when you've got those people's engaged and they have part of the ownership. And then just building those into your project. And then empowering to look, like I said, look downstream, what's coming, ask the questions so that you can go, oh, I didn't think about that. Let's, and actually being able to address it sooner than later. And I think this is a question, right? Like what do you see could make people abandon on their commitments? We talked about one earlier. What are some others that maybe the team is thinking of? Anything you've run into specifically?
sometimes what can happen is initially people are half committed, but there are people in the team who are opposed. And of course, there are, as a project goes, they're getting influenced by a lot of people, but it's just the influence of people who are completely opposed spreads to the people who were initially either fully on board or a little bit on board.
Mm-hmm. I can give a current example of this this week, and I can tell you how I addressed it. I don't know if it's the right answer, but this is what I did. So I had started noticing a trend within the project where I'm hearing the same phrasing repeated, which mentioned product limitations. Oracle's product limitations. Oracle's product limitations. Or I think some of you may have heard this before because I'm seeing a couple nods. And I started to notice a trend, and I'm like, this is becoming like a accepted way of speaking. And every time what happens when you have this uncommitted, blaming it's the product limitation, and it's not true. So for example, they were saying, well, this is a product limitation because this field's not available. Well, it was really because they disabled the field. It wasn't something we'd done, right? But I was noticing this was becoming really problematic, where it's starting to lead to mistrust all the way up through leadership, and they're starting to say it. And so what I did, because I'm like, it's just me. I'm not the trusted person. I'm not the animator that's on the ground with the teams that can be trusted. How do I get those teams on board? And we'll see if I haven't heard anything back yet, but I sent an email to our executive PMO and all of our project managers, and I said, I need your help. We have a problem here. I'm seeing a trend that this behavior is becoming accepted, and we're getting in meetings, and it's putting Oracle on the defensive continually to explain why there's not a product limitation, that it's something else. We need to change this. And so I just sent an email and asked for their support, because I said, I'm not in all your internal meetings. I'm sure it's happening there too. So can you help me be my change agent in not allowing for that behavior? And we'll see. I don't know if they'll start doing it, but at least they're aware of it and know that I'm aware of it, and that it's not accepted, and that as we get into these, let's step back and say, is this a true statement, or is this something that we need to start altering those and have them get on board? That's an example of something I did just recent. I'll let you know the outcome. We'll see if it works.
Karina, I love that example too, because now we're getting back to a real example of like how this is a cycle, right? It's not just like vision is established, commitment is set, everyone like signs the contract, and then we're off into just action mode for the rest of it. That like even in the midst of a project, you're asking people to either recommit or make a new commitment around having to kind of scrub some of this language, or to get their teams to think a little bit differently about the project.
Yep.
Bianca, I saw you had come off mute when Vivek was about to share.
I actually wrote it in the Slack. I think one of the biggest issues I have seen is with the vision setting of the client is it's often during the sales cycle. It's a small team which often works with the sales team, the leadership, to commit to the project. Then when the contract is signed, they form their project team. And what I have seen almost on all my last almost 3 years on the cloud implementation, especially when it was global, we did not get the commitment from the resources. They did not plan to backfill the resources. They still had their day jobs to do. So they wanted to commit, but there were only so many days in their workday, right, to work on the project, especially when it was director level resources who could really bring their people along were like really would have been or are the change agents in their team as well to communicate the vision, why it is good, why we would do the project, what's in for them. But then they're like, no, we can only do like an hour workshop, we can't plan even half a day workshops for 3 days in a row, to go through global design or things like that, because, and yeah, so I think that is one of the big bottlenecks or challenges which I have seen on the projects, on my recent projects, and we had to escalate to the steering committee and like, it's we hear you, but can't hire people, don't have money, can't find them, make it work, kind of.
There is another aspect, well, actually a number of aspects here. One is that the salespeople tend to sell a vision which is a little further from fact than we might actually like. Then you end up with vision exhaustion, where you keep pounding the vision into them, and the vision is not the reality. The vision is not the reality of where they are, where they can get to, and that just leads to an erosion of belief. And then the other side, of course, is whose vision? There was a vision for Oracle Cloud at my customer. They spent, over $1 million, but that vision never made it further down than the signatories to the order. You talk to the infrastructure people, there's absolutely no vision of Oracle Cloud. So we've got to be very careful with this. I'm an enterprise architect, and my standing joke with customers is I'm on the enterprise architecture side. I tread the line between vision and delusion. And then we move to the solution architects who are about delivery of fact. And our salespeople tend to promise much. The enthusiasm that is generated usually dissipates at fairly early contact with the product and the effort that needs to be done. So we do need to deal with that reality of, you can't just do the happy clappy stuff and keep wandering around and saying how wonderful it is, when people's reality is, no, it really isn't. So that's another balance, is being empathetic of the pain that they're feeling and the pressure they're under, while still trying to maintain some level of enthusiasm for why this is going to be better. And if you're in the middle of what is fundamentally a technical upgrade rather than a feature upgrade, where there's little or no actual benefit that is going to come other than the fact that they have a supportable release, that can be super challenging.
Yeah, I so appreciate that, because I love the vision exhaustion. I'm in the middle of one of those scenarios as well, where the original vision from the sales does not match the delivery, right? And so I completely can relate to that, and it's a very important point for us all to be aware of the strategic vision and how it ties in once we actually go into implementation. So thank you.
Because the salespeople are pretty much out of sight at this point.
Yeah.
They've got paid, they're gone, and then we're left.
Their accountability is over. Yeah. Very good point.
Well, I just want to thank everybody. We are just a minute over time. First off, thanks, Trina, for spending some time taking all the stuff that's in your head and helping us put it into slides and into a presentation. And thanks, everyone, for joining us and participating. You should see a poll pop up just so we can get a little bit of anonymous feedback from you. We're hoping to continue having these every month, so be on the lookout